So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Yliruka. I'm currently a visiting researcher at Imperial College London, and I will be the chair of this event. But I'm glad that I'm joined by Bindi Patel, who's the head of customer experience and communication at Vattenfall. And Bindi is really a seasoned expert in the energy industry, as she has been part of it for 14 years. She has a passion of putting customers at the heart of everything she does. In 2015, Bindi launched Heat Trust, where she served as a director and led the development of new statutory legislation of heat networks, which were instrumental in providing customers effective protection. But Bindi's commitment is not limited to the regulatory compliance, but goes well beyond that. She is one of the driving forces behind the diverse heat network, of which Vattenfall is a founding member. Bindi believes that a workforce should be representative of the communities it serves, and that everyone, regardless of their background, should be able to contribute and participate in the transition of a low carbon future. So I will hand over to Bindi for her to give a brief introduction about herself, the stops and the journey she's done during her career. And then we will start a bit on questions that you might have and that I actually have for Bindi. So please, Bindi, over to you.
Great. Well, Maria, thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction, very generous, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar and this chat. It's a bit daunting having to talk about yourself, so I do feel a little bit nervous. But you know, excited to be able to have a chat and hoping that what we get to talk about, maybe that resonates with people who are live watching today, or maybe they'll watch later. So I think I've had a pretty varied career in the energy sector. I didn't go out specifically searching for a role or a career within energy. I think it found me rather than I found it. But I have worked across different areas, different organisations, be those both in kind of public sector or private sector. But when I look at the roles that I've had and the reasons I've approached those or gone for those roles, and even staying within the sector, I've always known that I've wanted to work or have a job that had a purpose that was involved in sustainability, in tackling climate change, in making a difference. And I feel that I've had both or all of those in the roles that I've taken within my sector. Within my career. I don't have an energy background by education either. I'm a second generation immigrant, so my parents are first generation, and for perhaps a lot of second generation immigrants, going to university or being the first to go to university is quite a common theme. That was the same for myself, and so I didn't really have the background or the network on, well, what would you choose or what could you choose? So I really just went for the subjects that I liked and enjoyed, and I did a physical geography undergraduate, and was amazed that when I went to university, I had friends who were doing things like joint honours, and I was like, oh wow, you can do joint honours? Had no idea that was possible. And I then followed up with a postgraduate, and was more interested in, at that point, in more of the political aspects of it. So my reason for choosing geography was I really like, and I find it's about people, it's about places, it's about the impact it has, and there's history in that as well. And those are still areas that I really enjoy outside of work. I like kind of political ecology, and my postgraduate was more about that kind of political ecology, very much focused on countries in the developing world. So I initially thought I'd want to do something in international development. It's kind of totally different to where I've ended up. But my first role, or proper role within the sector, after doing an internship in a sustainability outfit, it was called London Sustainability Exchange, was for a small consultancy. It was a small energy consultancy, but chose a job, chose to apply for it because it was focused on energy, but also kind of climate change. And the role that was I had there was working as part of a team that delivered a project for the Energy Saving Trust, and it was called Practical Help. And that program was supporting local authorities. It was essentially a bit like I don't know if people remember this, but like if you remember Ask Jeeves, it was where you would submit questions, and our role was to provide that kind of research outlet for local authorities. It might be that they had questions on climate change strategies. We would deliver outreach as well, so delivering workshop sessions in how to create a local authority's climate change strategy. It would be about energy efficiency, it'd be about fuel poverty. So it was a resource that they could use, because local authorities, in terms of kind of being time stretched, if they needed that external help, then you'd submit a question, we'd do the research for you, and then and give you that back. So I did that, or worked at Impetus Consulting, was the little consultancy that was the name. And then there was other kind of consultancy options there, supporting kind of energy master planning, fuel poverty initiatives as well. But that contract, that Practical Help contract, was then actually taken back into the Energy Saving Trust. And so I had my first experience of being 2P'd. So 2P'd is where your employment contract moves across. And so I continued with that at EST, but I think at that point I was coming up to kind of 2 years then. I felt I really wanted to get experience and working with local authorities. It might be good to work in a local authority, and I made that jump and applied for a role at Lambeth Council. Now, I guess the thing to kind of caveat here is this was then kind of austerity. So we'd had the financial crash, and there wasn't a lot of money to go around. So I had worked, or the time that I'd spent at local authority, I think was very different to those before the financial crash, and then since, hopefully kind of continued decade of austerity, but feel that there's been more funding available to local authorities. It was definitely a learning curve. I learned so much. I was within the Housing and Regeneration Directorate, but within the Environment team. It was a small environment team, so we had our manager, but we also had my colleague who was our energy strategy officer. I was in the environmental projects officer, and my role focused more on sustainability in the built environment, and so was supporting both our regeneration and housing colleagues and also our planning department on assessing applications that were coming in from developers, looking at their sustainability strategies and their energy strategies, and providing that kind of in-house advisory service. First kind of exposure to negotiating, so there was quite a lot of times where you were having to negotiate what a developer would be willing to offer as part of their planning application. Did find quite often that things were readily committed at outline planning application stage, and then once it got down to detailed planning, commitments started to fall away. But really interesting in understanding how a local authority kind of manages that. And it was really nice to have that exposure in collaboration with other parts, so particularly with our regeneration planning and housing colleagues. And the role that a local authority plays and the positive impact that they can have in placemaking and shaping. So it was really nice to be part of an organisation where you are able to see how master planning is done, how large regeneration schemes are kind of conceptualised. I found that really exciting. And then it was around the time where they were providing low carbon zone funding, so we bid for some low carbon zone funding, and we were successful in that, and had a colleague who joined and led that, and she's gone off and done great things, and that started a company called Repowering London. So that was really exciting, but I think at that point I'd had done the kind of 2 years-ish and started to get kind of itchy feet, and working within a local authority, you are exposed to obviously local planning, so developing local planning policies, supplementary planning. And at that point I felt, as I mentioned, I'm interested in more kind of impact on people, on politics. I'd like to know more kind of larger scale policy, and that kind of moved again. So I could have stayed within the local authority environment and perhaps moved up and got larger roles. But I then did a bit of a pivot really and went into kind of more pure policy and regulatory issues, and by joining trade association world. And I spent 5 years, the next kind of 5 years in the trade association world. I moved to a trade body called the UK Business Council for Sustainable Energy. And that was a small trade body which brought together the large energy companies at the time and National Grid, and it was about strategic policy. I worked more on consumer side issues, so again, energy efficiency, fuel poverty. But shortly after moving, I then experienced my second 2P process. So there was a merger of a number of energy trade associations, whereby the Generation Trade Association and the Retail Side Trade Association, 3 trade associations effectively merged to become what is now Energy UK. So Energy UK is one of the largest trade bodies for the energy sector and covers the value chain. So it covers from generation, not networks, that's a separate trade association, but generation and retail supply. And again, kind of moved and focused more on retail policy, again, energy efficiency, energy company obligations. So looking at that and the successes of different supplier obligations that were developed, and the retail market. Again, a massive learning curve in finding out the kind of cycle of policy development. And I think a big learning for me is that policy can be slow, it can be cyclical. In those 5 years, I think I wrote consultations on energy efficiency, or even saying the main things, the main asks that we had as a sector, as an industry. I do remember thinking, right, this is the 4th time that I'm writing the same response, because things weren't moving as quickly as we want them to do. And I think we're still in that situation where we're like, well, how do we improve energy efficiency in building fabric? We know what we need to do. It's just having the will, political will, to get it done. Being in a trade association environment, I found it a real privilege, being able to work with such a wide variety of different members, hearing their different perspectives, their different priorities, and being able to be that person or that organisation where you get to hear that, collate that, bring that insight together, and engaging with government and regulators on that. It was fascinating, challenging at times, absolutely. And I think in a trade association, not only are you representing your members and their perspectives, but you're also, a key part for me was being their critical friend and actually challenging them back and saying to the sector, actually, no, you need to offer more. And it's particularly in energy is an essential service. And so we need to make sure that we are providing a service that is accessible to all, providing fairness to all. So that was really, for me, a lot of learning and a lot of good kind of work memories in that time. But after 5 years, again, I was like, well, what's the next role? You either move up. I had a promotion in that role, but I was like, well, do I want to just have a pure policy career, or do I want to do something else? And here I kind of think I took my biggest risk, because I was in a fairly comfortable role, a safe role, an established role, but I applied to take on the role at Heat Trust. So this was the new independent consumer protection scheme for the heat network sector that was being developed by a different trade association. So again, still within the trade association environment, which was the Association for Decentralised Energy, so the lead trade association for the heat network sector. But it was a massive risk, because I was going from a safe role into a role where I would be the only employee. And my role was to launch the consumer protection scheme and to get as many heat network operators to commit to voluntary consumer protection standards. And this was at the beginning, where the market, wanting to grow the market, but obviously understanding that we needed to move to more of a regulated sector as well. Heat networks at the moment still remain unregulated. Regulation is coming and the new regulator will be Ofgem, but that was only announced within the last kind of 18 months. So this was like the precursor, the kind of stepping stone of, we know the market needs to be regulated, let's not wait for regulation, let's make sure that we can work as an industry to start implementing the requirements that a solid regulated industry, you'd expect that solid regulated industry to have. I think what, you know, for me, probably the most challenging role that I had, because I was covering so many roles. I was doing external speaking events, trying to get people raising awareness of the scheme. I was assessing applications for those organisations that were applying to register their heat networks with the scheme. I was doing press releases, website updates, finance, so doing the invoicing, doing the cash flow, committee meeting minutes, agenda setting, was kind of covering it all. And so it was super challenging. I found it one of my a real sense of pressure as well, and a real sense of responsibility, because I felt definitely out of my depth, entering something into the unknown, but probably one of the best things that I could have done, because it was that kind of fight or flight. You know, you've taken on this role right now, come on, you've got to try and make a success of it and do it. And I stayed in that role for 5 years. The organisation still exists, so it's still kind of going from strength to strength, and I take a lot of pride out of that, knowing that it's still there and it's still, you know, that kind of beacon of introducing that stepping stone from it to a regulated market. So I do feel a real sense of kind of pride and accomplishment for the 5 years that I had at Heat Trust. So it means a lot to me. But that introduced me to the heat network world, which I've been in now for over 8 years, and I feel very passionate about it. It's a small part of our energy market, and we want to grow it for it to be a much larger part of our energy market. It's providing about 2 to 3% of heat demand at the moment, and we want it to be providing, you know, closer to 20%. And for me, heat networks bring it a bit full circle. I've done this kind of journey of starting out, you know, advising about, you know, broader energy efficiency, climate change, thinking about going into kind of policy and like energy policy, then thinking about consumer protection. And now I'm on the delivery side. I'm actually at Vattenfall. So I'm at Vattenfall, and I'm in the heat networks part of the business in the UK, which is fairly new. We entered the heat network world in the UK in 2018. I joined in 2020. And heat networks for me are about delivery of local energy for local people, and community is very much at the heart of a heat network, because it is local energy infrastructure. And that kind of brings that, for me, the nice kind of, I guess, kind of Venn diagram of where it's sustainability, it's low carbon energy, it's about placemaking as well, but it's also people. How are we delivering impact on people's lives and the wider community? And it's nice to be in a sector or part of the energy market where you can do that. Like, it is our role to ensure that we're delivering infrastructure. It's our role to ensure that we're delivering that low carbon heating to people, delivering great service for those customers, but also what lasting impact do we have in those communities, because we are there for the long term. And so you do have like more of a local face-to-face presence in those communities. And so social value is a massive thing for us, and something that we're working on at the moment. And I think it brings that, for me, Vattenfall is 100% state-owned by the Swedish government, so it's that kind of public sector ethos as well, but we are investing private sector money. In a sense, we are in the low-carbon energy sector. So that's kind of a canter that brings me to where I am today. So I look after customer experience and communications, and that's been a kind of expansion of my role. I started off in customer experience, and now it's been broadened out to cover communications. But I do like that, because for me it is all about how are we interacting and communicating with all of our audiences, and that's not just in terms of service design and delivery, but it's how we're communicating to all of our stakeholders, be that through marketing, through local community engagement, but also in the engagement we have with government and regulators. So I work quite closely with our public affairs guys. So yeah, hopefully that's a good kind of canter through.
No, I think for me it was a very good summary. I mean, of course, in preparation for this meeting, I had looked at your CV, we had talked together, but I think it also highlighted very well the different aspects that you had in your career, and I think that's why I really enjoy like having the conversation with you, because I think some people stay for a long time in the same company and evolve within the company, as you've mentioned, that they grow or like they're promoted within it, but you really took, I think, within a common theme, very different angles on it. And I think it highlighted very well that, yeah, Vattenfall is state-owned, so you have a bit of the public eye, and it's not a pure private sector investment type. So yeah, I enjoyed the summary. Of course, I'm curious to know a bit more actually how how you feed into the wider Vattenfall organization. Like, so I imagine you being more the external facing role, so especially as it's already in your name with the customer, and you mentioned the state, like external stakeholders, but how does that feed into internal processes that you have? And yeah, so perhaps seeing the connections a bit more within your organization.
Sure. So I sit within our market development team, and the way in which we're set up within the heat business in the UK is that we have kind of central functions, and then we have our regional teams. We operate in 3 cities in the UK, so we have a heat network in Bristol, and we are constructing heat networks in Scotland, so Shawfair, which is just south of Edinburgh, and in London. So we have got a project in the north of London, and we're also developing one in the south of London as well. So my role being in central function is to, and with the team that I have, is to provide support to all of our regions, and that support kind of covers kind of 4 broad pillars. So when we talk about customer experience, the difference between customer experience and customer service is that we're not talking about kind of transaction, was the bill sent on time? Of course, that's really important. It's more about the end-to-end customer journey, and that starts way before a customer has moved into a property that's on a heat network. It's thinking about what is the end-to-end customer experience for all of the different people that are on that journey with us. So we do a lot of work with engaging with clients way before, so talking about how can we ensure that the way in which we're onboarding their customers that become our customers is kind of dovetailed. So how do we bring our marketing and our customer journey plans together? It is about the experience of not only direct customers, but also people who aren't direct customers, so the wider community. And that kind of brings me on the kind of the second pillar, is that we have a long-term vested interest in the communities that we serve, and as someone who an organization that's building new infrastructure, we need supply chain and supply chain partners. And so how do we create good quality local jobs for people? And those can be jobs in terms of the design, operation, delivery of the heat network. Those can be jobs that are more about central functions in terms of commercial roles, business development roles, communication roles, customer experience roles. So what is the lasting social impact that we're having with our projects? How are we ensuring that we are delivering long-lasting social impact? It is also the comms side. So how do we support all of our regions to be speaking with a consistent voice? So providing them support on that, and then also being clear about what our key messages are. So that's liaising not only with our regional teams, but also with other functions. So I've mentioned our public and regulatory affairs teams, but also our media relation teams. So how to ensure that we've got consistent messaging, we know what our key messages are, and we're able to communicate those out. Be that through getting our staff members to conferences, to external speaking events, to local engagement events, but also thought leadership pieces. So we're actively trying to be more vocal about some of our thought leadership pieces, and those are doing kind of blogs and op-eds. the other key thing I think about us in terms of customer experience is that we always talk about when you're making decisions within the business, what impact that has on the customer. So the person that is paying the bill for having their heating and hot water delivered by Vattenfall, and being that kind of critical friend to customers. Like, is this fair for the customer if we make this decision as opposed to a different decision? So I always talk about us being that, or holding that kind of critical friend perspective when we're engaging and liaising with our colleagues, and being that centre of support and expertise. So we're here to support our teams as they're delivering their projects, and hopefully kind of making sure that it's all done with this level of consistency.
Yeah, no, and thank you for elaborating on it. And I think, yeah, I seeing that you are sitting in a central role. It's often in bigger companies structured in the central and the regional team, and of course they need to, yeah, you need to have the consistent message. You need to have a consistent approach, and I think also keeping your values. And as you mentioned, like I think the heat network really is the characteristics that is local. And I actually, it's nice to hear, or in a sense, it's good to see the broader scope, that it's not just a local solution for the consumer that's locally placed, but also the people that support it, that it's supported by the community around it, which is, of course, for a new concept, which it is a bit in the UK, even more critical, I guess.
Yeah,
so
and I was going to say, just on that, it's because, you know, implementing and developing a heat network really does have it has local impact, in that you are causing some disruption in a local community as you're building it. So this does require, this is infrastructure. These are large insulated pipes where we have to dig up the roads to put them in. And so in the same way that I'm sure people have experienced where roads are closed off because there's utility works going in, we do have that impact. So we are, you know, there is that visibility and that presence. So it's really important that we're present locally, and people can understand, well, what are you doing? What will this what will the heat network have, or what impact will it have for me? How will it impact them? But I also think that that's an opportunity for us, that because it's local energy, we're putting those pipe works in, but we're also generating the energy locally. It's not coming far away. So if for the project in Bristol, it is the largest water source heat pump in the UK. So we're taking the heat from the harbour water to deliver low carbon heating to customers. And so it's nice to be able to say, when we've done, you know, we do tours quite frequently, when we're crossing over the bridge, we can point up and say, yep, that building there, that's the water source heat pump, and that is where we get, or, you know, is contributing to the heating in the heat network. In the pipes that are currently underneath your feet right now. It's really quite tangible. Yeah. You know, just lovely to be able to communicate that to customers, that it's local energy for local people.
Yeah, no, it's true that also the more you make like the energy transition and energy tangible, it's not just the thing you plug out of, like you plug into your electricity, your adapter, and it just comes out and everything just functions. The more you can show what you all need in order to create that energy and how that needs to transition, the more tangible also this ambition comes, and perhaps also the understanding around the difficulties of implementing it, because it's just such a big infrastructural project. Speaking not only of heat networks, but like the whole energy transition. So yeah, I like the tangible. I'm always fan of seeing real equipment, like also to go to generators, or like, I don't know, even if you don't like coal-fired plants or gas power plants, looking at them is just illustrative of just the scale and the problem.
Just how much goes or has to happen in order for you know, for today, for me to have plugged my laptop in. Like, the process that's happened behind that is extraordinary.
And how does the diverse heat network link into this? Is it basically, does that go hand in hand with your job? Is that something you have as a side role? Like, how does it go along, and what does it mean when you do a heat network project, for example, in Bristol?
Okay, so the diverse heat network is something more broader about the sector coming together and making a commitment, a strong commitment in how do we ensure, like, a successful heat network sector is one that is diverse and representative of the communities that it serves. And so it's Vattenfall's a founding member, but it's not just us. It's our fellow counterparts in other organisations. So we have Vital Energy energy, we have Fair Heat, we've got Triple Point, we've got government is also represented. We've got Equans. I'm forgetting people, which is really bad, but hopefully they'll understand. But this is like industry coming together, saying this is vital for the longevity of our sector. You know, we're making efforts, but we need to do more. And you know, as you mentioned earlier, I've been working in the energy sector now for 14 years. And it was very different when I started out. Very often I would be in events or meetings, particularly when I was during kind of trade association days, where I would be not only sometimes the only female, but absolutely the only person of colour in rooms. I'm really, really pleased that that is changing and has changed. It doesn't mean that it's brilliant there. I think there's so much more that we can do. Even looking back from when I first started to where we are now, the number of women that are in more senior roles has definitely improved. You know, our managing director at Vattenfall is female, which is wonderful to see. And you know, that's not just for tick boxes, that's because it brings, you know, women in leadership positions bring new perspectives. There's evidence, like McKinsey also says, you know, businesses that have females in leadership positions are more profitable. It makes business sense. You have an organization that is more representative of society and the and for us, for the communities that we serve. But for me, it's really important to move beyond just gender, and that we are looking at diversity in the round, in the whole, and that's the aim of Diverse Heat Network. It's not just to focus on one aspect of diversity. It is to talk about, it is to focus on how do we become a truly diverse industry. And there is work for us to do, but what we take away is that commitment between us as organisations, in that we can only do that by working together. We can't do that by just kind of working in silos. So one of the first things that we did was to create some videos which could be used in schools. So a lot of this is actually, you've got to start this from primary age, and trying to break down some of those myths on what are professional careers. There are so many different opportunities in the energy sector. I think maybe if I was younger and someone said, what about a role in the energy sector, I may have assumed that I'd have to have been technically minded. We absolutely need technical people, we need engineers, etc. But we also need people who can talk to customers. We need people who can do the numbers, commercial mindset. We need people who can do business development. Community engagement, again, really, really key role for us. There are so many different roles that trying to kind of break down those kind of myths that certain sectors only require certain skill sets. That's not true in the energy sector. I can speak more clearly from the heat network perspective. There are so many different job opportunities, and it's that diversity of thought that brings you success.
No, that's true. And it's it's still a way to go. I mean, you've been, as you mentioned, around much longer than me, but still, I mean, for example, my journey has been very male dominated, which is not I never felt it personally as a struggle against it, but it is still something you notice. And I think, therefore, I wanted to link back to what you said. So how did you handle situations, especially in the beginning, when you were, let's say, the outsider, because of gender, because of your background? Like, how do you... how did you handle it? Or like,
So I would say I'm a person that I'm definitely an introvert. I'm not an extroverted person, so I'm more of someone that probably stays a bit more in the background. I think if I look back and reflect, I've probably felt very intimidated, to be entirely honest. Like, it is taken me a long time to kind of feel very comfortable, or not, maybe I'm not very comfortable, but to feel more comfortable that I'm not the type of person that it is that's the loudest in the room. I'm not the type of person that would instantly kind of throw myself in the limelight. I think I definitely found it hard, and I definitely think that I was more cautious with speaking or raising opinions. And I think it's through having a level of experience and understanding and just being confident in my own knowledge and opinions, being able to say, well, no, I do have an opinion here, and I can put my hand up and say it. It doesn't stop me, even like to this day, when I'm, if I'm on a meeting or a call, and you're with your counterparts in the from across the sector, and everyone's making points or opinions, I'm always feeling quite nervous about putting my hand up and making my point known. Maybe it may not come across to other people, but my God, like it does, definitely, I can feel it inside. But I think, again, like I think I've also come to terms, well, I don't have to force myself to be that extrovert either. And this is definitely a generalization, but I've always found that the sector, and particularly the kind of policy sector, there are quite a lot of extroverted people in it. And as a person that's quite naturally introverted, it can feel, well, for me, it was intimidating. But I enjoy the subject matter. I enjoy being in that world. I just had to kind of make peace with the fact, or be, it's fine for me not to be the person that is always out there or pushing themselves to be out there, because I don't need to do that.
No, but it's I think here you mentioned two aspects that I wanted to link on. It's like, you also grow into a role. I think assuming that from the beginning you would be vocal, no matter if you're an extrovert or introvert, it takes a while. And I think, of course, the setting of being with people that are not like you is more that you really question yourself a bit longer. I think it's just the one where you're a bit longer behind the wall, not saying anything until you're really confident that you're saying something. And then I think I don't know, for me, the experience was, for example, that people around me would say things with confidence and I would believe it. And at some point I had more knowledge and I was like, they're just saying wrong things with a lot of confidence. So I realized people don't always say something just because they know it. They just say things. So that's something you grow into. And then I think you mentioned that you were also different in like introvert, extrovert, etc. And I think it's exactly harnessing also how you're different. Because I think if people are very aware, they spot the difference and they make value of it. A good manager or good leader would actually see the differences within their team and value each of the contributions if they have time and, let's say, the ideal case. So it doesn't hurt to be different. It's just you need to settle, as you said it, like with yourself being in that group, I guess.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And as you say, like I think as I've the longer I've been in this industry now, I have some team members, is also kind of imparting that, in that be yourself. Don't feel you need to fit into a box because for some reason you feel that there's a certain way that you need to present yourself. It's no, just absolutely be yourself and be your authentic self.
Yeah. I want to encourage everyone who's online to also submit questions. Otherwise, Bindi and I are going to just have a nice chat for a while. But yeah, again, an invitation that you can send any questions. But I have, of course, another one, which is, we mentioned now leadership, or I dropped this. And I wondered how you are now in a leadership role. And I wondered what you've learned along your career and what do you pay attention on in a leadership role? And perhaps, are you in your everyday business able to really, play in the strength of everyone, or how does your team work best together, for example?
It's a massive question.
Let's take it one by one. So, what have you learned about leadership during your journey, to where you're at the moment?
So leadership involves you being able to be vulnerable, and it's important in being able to kind of build trusting relationships with your team members. And again, as someone who is more naturally as an introverted person, that takes some work. One of the things that I feel I benefited a lot in my current role within Vattenfall is that we've got good training and development program, and there was some training that was done, and it's a concept called the Johari window, where there are things that you know about yourself that people know. There are things that you don't know about yourself that other people do, and you should get feedback on that. Ask people for feedback. There are things that that others don't know. It's more about how do you become more vulnerable and share what you're willing to. And then there are things that you don't know and others don't know. And, you know, building trust does involve you taking risks and being a bit more vulnerable. And that's definitely something that has been a learning curve in developing more of a team, but also a leadership role. Also, there's no one type of leadership. You've got to adapt your leadership for different people, as you've kind of touched on. It's not, the way in which you lead one person will not be the way in which another person needs to be led, because they have different needs. And being attuned to that, it can, I think if it's saying like, it can sound exhausting, but it's more about, again, it's getting to know your team members and understanding what works for them. And feedback, you've got to get feedback and be willing to both provide and receive feedback. Giving feedback when you're first having to do it is so awkward. And again, as someone who is more naturally introverted, having to give feedback to people because it's coming from a place of good intention. So you always have to remind yourself there's a way in which you give feedback to your team members, because you're doing it because you want them to develop, to be successful, to grow. And so always making sure that you have that intention is so important, but making sure that you're also giving that feedback in a way that they can receive it. There's no such there's no thing as giving a one way to give feedback. I've also in terms of kind of leadership, I think I've kind of focused on big picture for me, like focus on the end goal. Don't always kind of get dragged into some of there are short-term things, there are near-term things. You can get pulled into stuff. You've got to remain your focus on the end goal and the big picture, and remind yourself of that, and take time out. And when I say take time out, for me, taking time out is if you're stuck on something, go for a walk. Get the space, because getting that space for me just allows my brain to think a bit more, and then, right, okay, I now know what to do.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most valuable lessons I learned about myself, that if you take the step back, as you mentioned, or like when I was stuck in my PhD and it didn't make sense in my head, I would just go for a walk in Battersea Park, and I was like, oh, then I do this or that, like everything came together. You just need to let it go a bit, like forcing it sometimes doesn't lead to the result you wanted, perhaps.
Yeah, and sorry, there's one more, which is probably the most important one that I've had learning in terms of leadership. You do not have to be the expert to lead a team. It is, that absolute fallacy. You do not need to be the expert. Leadership is more than that. You are steering your team, coaching them, mentoring them, giving them training where they need it, but you have your team has the subject matter experts in there. I've I've definitely not applied for roles because I thought, oh, I'm not an expert in that. And women, we've all heard about women tend to not apply for roles if there are certain things that they can't do. They dismiss them, whereas male counterparts will say, well, I can do kind of 50% of it. Yes, I'll apply. So one of, for me is I've developed the most on learning on the job. That's the best training I've ever had, is through experience and learning on the job. And was on training actually last week. No, that's a lie. It was earlier this week. Time has flown by. Where you can learn something, but unless you can apply that learning, it's not going to stick. And you apply that learning by, experiencing it. So please don't let things prevent you from taking a punt on something or applying for a role because you think, oh, I'm not the expert or I don't know it. If you've got clarity in your vision and your goal, don't let it stop you.
Yeah. And I think the practical experience really tops anything. Like you need to, first of all, as you say, like you need to put yourself in a position where it's going to be uncomfortable. You do something new and you really don't know how you're going to react, but only in that learning you will actually face the implementation and do the active learning, because in theory you can do anything, but the challenges, the unpredictable challenges come in real life. So I think, and that's why I think actually I admire that you had so many different roles, because you took that position, you needed to get into that thinking, you needed to adapt to the environment, their goals, etc. And then you moved on and you do this again. And I think people sometimes underestimate how long it also takes to get all the basic knowledge everyone else has that has to be there forever. Like if you've been in a company for, I don't know, 10 to 20 years, you forget how much you just know passive knowledge.
Yes.
But so yeah, you actively also sought this learning curve, which I would also encourage.
Yeah. And you know, I don't know what I want to do. When people say, what's your kind of career goal or your career objective, I have no idea. I do remember kind of saying once to a previous boss who asked, what's your 5-year plan? And I was like, I don't know what I want to do by the end of the year, let alone in 5 years' time. Like some people do, and that's great. I think I probably live a bit more presently, and like, is what I'm doing now motivating me, satisfying me? Am I interested in it? Are there still things for me to learn? And again, that's one of those things that I kind of can't made my peace with. Like, I don't need to know what the next thing is. When the opportunity comes, then I'll take a look at it. But I still, you know, I love the team I work with. I love my job. I love the organization. I don't have that kind of like, that's where I want to be, and I'm happy with that. Like, I've made my peace with that. I don't need to know.
It also makes you more open to really the possibilities that you have. Like again, there is a different type of person, but I think you don't need to have that trajectory. You can also take the open doors, or you can open actively some doors and just explore, and then you can go back like on the one-way street. You're not lost once you go somewhere. But you opened many things now in our last 10 minutes, but so because you mentioned it now recently, it's like the career and that you don't have this long-term goal or like this one thing you want to reach. But what does it mean for you to have a successful career? Like, what do you associate with that saying?
Oh, I could answer that in many different ways. I certainly think when I was younger, I think kind of career goals would have probably been like, you know, seniority in a role, etc., kind of moving up. If I'm being entirely honest, and I've mentioned to people before, like for me, that balance, like I would love to be able to find a role in a position where it's part-time. Like for me, if there is any, if I could say that there is one goal in life, it is part-time work. So there's more things to do and explore outside of work. Yeah.
No, but I think this is.
But yeah, that's, you know, entirely honest, what would be my, you know, career and goal, career ambition, part-time work?
Yeah, no, but honestly, I find this refreshing because I don't know how many podcasts people listen to that are joining, but like most often it is the seniority, or it is the answer that they like new challenges, new things. Like, yeah, so I don't know. I found it very refreshing in a sense because also, of course, if you can achieve a role that you like and you can, maintain yourself with a part-time job and you have your other life on the side, you only have one life. If that's what you want to have.
So true, and you know, unfortunately, you know, life brings curveballs, and it is far too short. So absolutely, like, and I, you know, if I could tell my younger self that, then I would have traveled more and worked abroad.
Yeah, but this is, I think, also a challenge that when you ask people in hindsight what they would do differently, they always want to do something differently. However, they also don't acknowledge that like sometimes some phases are needed to get where you're at, to have this perspective, this calmness of saying, okay, I'm fine now. Like, yeah. So, but I know that I think this is the divided thing that older people, like, I mean, not saying you're old, I mean more like after 60s, you would often say like, oh, should I have done this? I should have done this. And while you're in it, you're just a hustler to get things done. So, but yeah, so I think, so part-time work, I think this is a good, and I also really think a new career perspective, because as you thereby said, career is not just growing in seniority, making more money, making more ranks. It can be anything and what you want it to be.
Yeah. We've got some new starters in the office, or and we were doing some stuff about working in the current organisation I'm at, and again, what I've told people who are doing internships or work experiences, the biggest thing for me is finding an organisation where your values align. It's so important. I think if you're working somewhere and you don't have the same values, then that conflict, I think, will just eat away at you. So for me, like, wherever you work, whatever role you have, you've got to be working somewhere where there's alignment in your values.
Yeah, I think that provides the most energy to accomplish a lot in your job without, as you mentioned, to fight that conflict all the time and to just swallow it. So yeah, that's I think that's a very valuable lesson to pass on. And being cautious of time, I still would like to ask you one question, because we mentioned about you said about the challenge of giving feedback, but then also one of the parts was getting feedback. And have you actively sought feedback throughout your career? And has external feedback helped you sometimes in different ways than you expected or advanced you? So yeah, the relevance of external feedback for you, perhaps.
Yeah, external feedback is so important, and some organisations do 360s, some where you can just send an email and ask people for feedback. I have done it, and then when you do get feedback, again, is taking it when reading it, taking it from the perspective and understanding that this is meant for you to think about and reflect on, and it is meant to help you. You decide whether to take that feedback on, right? Someone gives it to you, but you make the decision on whether is this feedback that one I agree with and I see, and I'm going to reflect on it, and you make that decision to say, right, I'm going to take this feedback on. So yes, it has helped me, because the way I, as you say, people see things in you that you don't necessarily see, and that's why you need to have an external validation. And when I mean when I say that, like, you need to have those external perspectives to confirm your own, because you have a perception. I have an idea of what I think I am and how I'm like and how I behave. But the only way for that to kind of be verified is to get the feedback from loads of different people. But ultimately you have the power to choose whether to take it forward or not. And then not only just friends, family feedback, but also having people who've perhaps coached, coaches who are totally separate. And I've certainly found that incredibly helpful, because they are a much more independent, arbitrary view, where they can give you some steering and some feedback. And when I've had that, it's been really, really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And seeing yourself through the lens of others is an interesting experience. And as you mentioned, I think you get feedback, and it's a harsh reflection also for yourself, what you want to be and what people perceive. And sometimes you actively choose also not to please, or like to not comfort this other aspect, because that doesn't align with what you thrive for or whatever.
Exactly.
So you keep your edge. Which I think is also what you need in someone. To be too round in an organization doesn't help you. You need to be tangible to people. It doesn't need to annoy people, but you also don't need to please everyone.
It's so important. Like, I mean, I've struggled with that concept, because I feel I'm naturally a person that is a bit of a people pleaser. It's not, but yeah, coming to terms, you don't need to please everyone, and you won't in life. You're not going to please everyone in life. That's okay. That is absolutely okay. Not everyone is going to like you. That's okay too.
Well, I hope people liked our conversation, though, because they were just our guests in a coffee chat at the moment. So yeah, but knowing that it's time to say goodbye, I thought this was a nice closing sentence, that to be true to yourself, as you said, and you don't need to perhaps please everyone, but of course be nice to people.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, Bindi, really thank you for being with us today. I really enjoyed it, and I think your journey is really interesting. or like, yeah, no, it's unique in some way. I haven't seen someone who has surrounded the heat network or the heat and the customer as much as you've done. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, Maria, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. It's one of the first ones, not one of the first ones, is the first one I've ever done. So thank you so much. You were really kind, and yeah.
Thank you. So for everyone, the recording of today's event will be made available on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, and please share the recording with anyone that you would think would profit of this conversation. Again, I guess feel free to reach out to Energy Futures Lab if you have any specific questions that's remaining. But otherwise, we hope you join us again for the Energy Futures Lab. And again, I want to highlight, thank you, Bindi, and I wish you all the best furthermore in the energy industry.
Thank you, and hopefully see you in person soon.
Yes. Speak soon. Bye bye.